Hey, it's Tom here and welcome back to the channel. Now, for the longest time, Columbia University and Columbia Business School over in the US has been basically the place to go if you want to learn how to become a value investor in a professional kind of university context. It's where Ben Graham initially started teaching his classes on value investing. It has churned out some very famous investors over time, Warren Buffett being kind of the shining example there. And the current kind of main professor around teaching value investing is a guy by the name of Bruce Greenwald. Bruce Greenwald has again been teaching this course for many years now, and he too has had some pretty successful investors that are now very well known kind of go through his class. I think probably the most well-known one for Bruce Greenwald would probably be Li Lu. Li Lu has actually gone back and then presented at Columbia University, and he's also done an interview with Bruce Greenwald just in the last year or two. So Bruce Greenwald definitely knows his stuff when it comes to teaching value investing, and from time to time I stumble across kind of a clip from one of his classes and one of his lectures, and I stumbled across one of those a couple of days ago, basically around circle of competence, and even kind of going deeper into that and talking about specialization. And in that video he's basically arguing that even Warren Buffett, who's widely regarded as the greatest investor of all time and has invested across a broad range of industries, Bruce Greenwald kind of argues that really Warren Buffett is just a specialist in 2 or 3 industries, and any time that he has kind of invested outside of those areas, sure, he's done okay, but the results are nowhere near as good as when he's stuck to his kind of core circle of competence. So I want to show you that short clip from Bruce Greenwald in this video, and then give you my thoughts on what he had to say, and also try and apply that to my own personal kind of areas of expertise and specialization, I suppose. It's kind of got me thinking about whether I should perhaps be doubling down on some particular areas that I know really well. And it would be very cool down in the comments below if you could let me know if you think you have any particular areas of expertise or a strong circle of competence that is maybe a little outside of the norm, and an area where you think you have a significant advantage over the average everyday investor. I'd be super interested to hear kind of a diverse range of circles of competence down in the comments below. But before we get into that, we do have a sponsor for today's video, and this video is sponsored by Hatch. Hatch is the platform that I personally use for all of my US investing as a Kiwi based here in New Zealand. And in 2022, Hatch is asking you to think about what your big and small tomorrow goals look like. For me, the goal has always been financial freedom, putting a little bit away today with the aim that I can do the things that I want to do tomorrow. Everyone's tomorrow looks a little different, whether you want to buy your first home or become financially independent. Reaching your goals starts by taking the first step. That's why I invest with Hatch, to help make my plans a reality. If you want to get started investing with Hatch, check out the first link in the description where you can get a free $20 New Zealand top up when you make your first deposit of $100 New Zealand or more before the 30th of June 2022. Now, the link to this clip from Bruce Greenwald will be down in the description below. Shout out to the channel Zen Trade Game on YouTube for uploading this one, and let's roll that clip now.
What is the kind of search strategy? And the simplest one is one that almost nobody in the world does, to put you on the right side of the trade. That's essentially right, but it's in a sense more focused than that. You want to be a specialist. If I've been doing onshore South Texas Gulf Coast oil leases for 20 years, and that's all I do, and you fly down from New York and buy a lease from me at my price, who do you think is on the right side of that transaction? Specialization, that is focusing your intelligence, has enormous power, and almost nobody does it. In the investment field, if you look at even Warren Buffett, he is essentially a specialist in 4 industries. Banking, he owned a bank, and he's consistently invested successfully in banks. Obviously insurance, where he owns companies and has invested very successfully. Consumer non-durables, where the same applies, and media, where he owns newspapers and TV stations and has successfully traded them. If you look at his returns outside those areas, they are still good, but they're nowhere near as good as his returns in those areas. So the first thing you want to think of, and it is extraordinary how rare this is, you want to think of looking for investment managers or yourself being specialized.
So very interesting clip there from Bruce Greenwald around specialization, and it definitely resonates with me, kind of where he's coming from. If you are hyper specialized in one particular area and you see an opportunity come up and you're able to buy it at a price that makes sense, then you're really able to have a lot of confidence and kind of bet big on that particular investment. That makes a whole lot of sense to me, and it also kind of reminds me of something that Peter Lynch actually wrote about in his book, his very well-known book, One Up on Wall Street, which is a great read if you haven't checked that one out before. And Peter Lynch talks about this weird concept of, again, basically specializing in an industry that you know very well, but he talks about the weird concept that no one really seems to do it. For whatever reason, you have, steel workers, for example, might invest a little bit of money in some biotech company, some very small, high-growth biotech company, because they think it's going to be the next big thing, but you will also very rarely see people that work in the biotechnology field invest in those companies, and maybe they might be interested in some hot commodity steel stock. You kind of have this weird crossover of industries there. And I think for some reason people kind of get attracted to this exotic, industry investing type of idea and investing in a place where they don't really know particularly well. And I don't know why that is, but I certainly see a lot of people do it. But, one of the things that Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett have done extremely well over time is stick within their circle of competence. Anytime that they are approaching the edge of it, they tend to kind of rein themselves back in. That's kind of the areas where they've often made mistakes. For example, when Warren Buffett invested in diversified retailing, which interestingly was not that diversified, I think they had like 3 stores or something, he kind of got it handed to him when he made that investment. And there's been countless others where he's kind of approached, I would say, the edge of a circle of competence outside those core industries that Bruce Greenwald described, like banking, insurance, consumer non-durables, and media. Basically, anytime he's stepped outside of that range, he has had more mistakes, I would say, than he has had in that core basket of industries. I don't know if I've ever seen Warren Buffett make a mistake in banking. I don't know the banking industry that well, but I know that Warren Buffett has a very long track record of investing in it, and I don't think he's ever made a mistake. I might be wrong on that, but let me know down in the comments below if he has made a mistake in banking. It definitely hasn't been at, serious scale. So I think there really is a lot to be said for sticking squarely within your circle of competence and I guess taking advantage of your unfair advantages. Now, I want to spend a few minutes kind of reflecting on this clip from Bruce Greenwald from a personal perspective and give you kind of some of my areas of expertise, I would say, or especially areas where I feel like I have an advantage over the average investor in the stock market. It's a funny one because a lot of people will almost certainly be an expert in something, even if it's not the industry you might work in your day job. Maybe it's a hobby of yours. Maybe you're really into gaming or, into kind of something outside of your day job that there happens to be some public companies listed in that area. I think you have a real kind of structural advantage over like a hedge fund manager who's just worked in the finance industry the whole time and I guess never actually used a whole bunch of the products in that industry or worked in that particular industry. And although I definitely try to keep an open mind and expand the circle of competence over time and remain fairly agnostic about where in the world I invest and the industries in which I invest, there are most certainly some areas where I tend to dismiss companies very quickly, and there are certainly some areas where I tend to kind of hone in on them very fast, and I feel like I can understand those businesses very quickly and, again, probably a little better than the average investor. Now, the most blatantly obvious area for me personally where I should have an advantage over the average investor is in agriculture. So I have a degree in agricultural science. I work in the agriculture industry in my day job. and I feel like I understand farm systems and kind of the process of food production very well. And although my formal background is around largely New Zealand systems and largely dairy farms and red meat producers, I feel as though that expertise can expand out a little more broadly into, I would say, just the broad area of food production. So more recently I've been looking at a company called Naked Wines in the UK, for example, and there's a lot of similarities in terms of the economics of making a vineyard and a winemaking business profitable. There's a lot of similar economic characteristics to a dairy farm or a red meat farm here in New Zealand. So I think I can definitely kind of have an advantage in those areas, and it's a surprisingly kind of broad category to operate in, I would say. So it's not just literally farm businesses that I think I can get my head around. Specifically, I think there's broad kind of inputs and outputs from a farm that I'm reasonably familiar with. So I have a pretty good understanding of a lot of commodities more generally, so like fertilizer, for example, or companies that sell food products like milk or meat. I've talked about A2 milk, for example, on the channel fairly extensively here. So businesses like that, I feel like I can understand very well. But again, I recognize where kind of the edge of that circle of competence is. Sure, I understand food production and I understand some of the commodity industries that kind of feed into agriculture and food production, but that doesn't necessarily mean I understand every commodity. I'm certainly no expert in oil or natural gas or uranium, for example. That would be kind of stretching it too far for me. And there are a couple of other areas where I feel like I have a distinct advantage over the average investor, and these ones aren't necessarily from working in an industry or anything like that. It's really from just following companies in these industries for a few years at this point, and kind of keeping an eye on them very closely and monitoring what they're doing. So I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of the automotive space and kind of metal bender type companies where you're producing cars, or more specifically, RVs and motorhomes and caravans and so on with my Thor Industries investment. That's an industry I feel like I understand pretty well. I previously have had an investment in Fiat Chrysler, which is now merged with the PSA group to become Stellantis, and definitely understand the economics of that business pretty well and how much operational leverage can kind of cause you to get your face ripped off as an investor if things don't quite go well. So that's an industry that I feel like I definitely understand also. Now, outside of those kind of couple of core areas for me, there's also some businesses that I think fall into the general category of things that most people understand pretty well. And that category tends to include things that you're a customer of. So maybe you are a customer of Amazon and use Amazon Web Services as part of your day job, for example, but maybe you're also a customer of Amazon and buy like everything in your life off Amazon, particularly if you live in the US. So there's businesses like that I think I can get my head around. I think that most people should have a reasonable time understanding businesses like Coca-Cola or Monster Beverage, or maybe fast food companies like McDonald's or Domino's or something like that. I think those are kind of some core industries that probably everyone can get their heads around, but the interesting thing with a lot of those businesses is because everyone understands them so well, they don't tend to get mispriced as often as some of the maybe more difficult to understand industries. That's perhaps a bit of a generalization, but there's definitely a lot of companies on my watch list that tend to fall into the bucket of companies and industries that probably most people can understand pretty easily. And there's a whole lot of companies that have been on that watch list for a very long time and really never gotten to a price where I think I could feel comfortable paying up for them. So I hope you enjoyed that clip from Bruce Greenwald and some thoughts from me on kind of circle of competence. Again, I would be super interested to hear any kind of weird areas of expertise in circle of competence that you think you have. Let me know down in the comments below. Always interested to hear that. I know we have a very diverse range of people that kind of watch these videos. So it's definitely got me thinking about, trying to spend more time specializing in companies that operate in the industry that, or the industries that I know very well. It seems like a really obvious thing to do now, kind of saying it out loud, but I think a lot of people don't tend to specialize as much as they probably could or should for whatever reason. So definitely appreciate the clip from Bruce Greenwald to get those cogs turning in my head. But that's it from me for this one. Do hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit like and hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.